They are the neighbors from hell.
It's chaos and mayhem.
She is dangerous.
And it erupts in a volatile explosion.
She almost killed him.
It was insane to watch.
And later, it's a violent holdup.
They had beanie caps and then they had bandanas over their mouths.
But who is really behind it?
Do you know that they say love is blind?
These people could have been plants.
Maybe they could be in on it.
And new tonight, caught on camera, a neighborhood nightmare in Huntington Beach where a woman is accused of attacking a man with her car.
The disabled man at the center of that fight says the video doesn't show what really happened, but it certainly is catching everyone's attention.
September 7th, 2014. Huntington Beach, California. It's an area record specialist Sarah Heidecker loves.
Huntington Beach is really nice. It's a nice beach town. It's pretty expensive.
Despite the hefty price tags, Sarah has found a friendly, affordable apartment not too far from the beach.
We all kind of got along together. Everyone would talk to each other when we ran into each other.
It's essential to have a good relationship with your neighbors. You tend to look out for one another.
Still, two of the people in the building have a reputation as being neighbors from hell.
My bedroom overlooked the driveway, and I would just hear screaming. Or something getting thrown, or just insanity. And I could hear it loudly over my TV.
The culprits, Bob Ayers and Laura Cox, seem to be fighting all the time.
They're definitely not a functional couple. I don't even know if they were like a couple anymore, but they were at one time. They just lived together.
Well, hey. I'm sorry if you don't know what I did.
With that background and that baggage, that probably adds even more intensity to the situations.
Sarah finds the constant screaming so frustrating, she starts recording it.
I started taping these videos so that I could show my friends because they didn't believe me. They were like, no, you don't have crazy neighbors. Like, Huntington Beach is a nice area. What are you talking about? She would be out in her car. She's so frustrated about not being able to find something in her car that she starts kicking her car, leaves giant dents in it.
Essentially, she has no filter. She strikes out, she yells out, uses vulgar language.
It was disrupting for me.
So she is not properly managing her anger. And as a result, it's making living with her unbearable.
And on this Saturday morning, things take a dark turn.
I woke up kind of late, and I just heard the worst screaming I'd heard this entire time. And so I paused the TV, and I went over to my bedroom, and I looked out the window. I was recording it, because that was just kind of what I did at that point.
Calm down and relax.
We see a man on a motorized scooter parked behind some type of vehicle, and it appears to be blocking the vehicle's exit.
Calm down. Shut the motor off for a few. Get the out of my way!
And she was just screaming at him.
You move your scooter!
You could tell he didn't want her to go anywhere. Like, she wasn't in the condition to drive, which was insane because it was like 8 in the morning. It was pretty crazy. I don't know if something had happened before. She was fuming.
This is intense.
Get the out of my way!
But neither Bob or his scooter are budging.
It's clear that he positioned his scooter directly behind her to keep her from leaving. He puts himself at risk so that she doesn't pose a danger to the public.
But she has no interest in calming down.
We see this escalate tremendously. She could do anything at this point.
Get the out of my way!
And then the tension boils over.
She demands that he move the scooter. He refuses.
All of a sudden, she just pushes him over.
Now, clearly, Bob is bigger than her. He's on a scooter that clearly must weigh a couple 100 pounds. And she just shoves that thing over essentially like it's a little tricycle.
She appears to have this rageful, superhuman strength.
She then climbs back in her vehicle and then starts to back up. Now, it's clear that he has some type of physical limitation that require him to use this scooter. She actually strikes the scooter, kind of pushing it to the side. We see pieces fall off of it. We hear the man screaming out.
I didn't think it was going to get as bad as it did.
Obviously, something serious is about to happen. Is she going to run him over?
This is out of control. But somehow, Bob manages to get out of the way just in time to avoid catastrophe.
She backs up into the scooter, and it looks as if she's gonna just run over Bob as well. She brakes the scooter with her car, and you hear him yelling. He's screaming, but she doesn't stop.
I didn't think it was gonna go that far. It was insane to watch.
She is dangerous. She's willing to run over this guy and to break anything and anyone in her path.
He picks up his scooter. He was yelling at her. His scooter still worked. He took off down the street, who knows where.
Laura takes off too, and Sarah and her neighbors race downstairs.
All of us came outside and we all called the cops.
No one is sure where Laura has gone, but when Sarah shows the police her videos, they know they have to find her.
It's clear that she poses a menace, and she needs to be stopped at this point.
I didn't think I was ever gonna have to show them to police. It was like, they need to see that this is happening.
And it doesn't take police long to locate Laura.
They find her down the road, and she's at a liquor store. They determine that she's under the influence, and that kind of pretty much explains her erratic behavior.
She was drunk. So that was what she officially got arrested for.
Laura is charged with driving under the influence. But Bob refuses to press any additional charges.
He was just kind of like, this is just a thing that happened. I don't want to do anything about this. Just let it go.
And that makes Sarah and her neighbors worry that they will never get rid of the neighbors from hell, especially when the building says they won't evict them.
We were all just kind of really worried and then also pretty frustrated that we still had to deal with this.
Sarah is used to seeing fighting, yelling, throwing things. She's not used to seeing near murder. She almost killed him. And for Sarah, that's where the line was crossed.
We didn't want it to keep escalating and something else bad to happen. It was like, I don't want to live like this anymore.
Essentially, at this point, the neighbors have had enough.
Frustrated, Sarah decides to post her videos on social media, and the story goes viral in no time.
Caught on camera and going viral, a violent encounter in Huntington Beach.
It kind of just took off and blew up into this thing.
You can see a woman pushing, then almost running over a man in a motorized scooter.
The violence, which erupted Sunday afternoon in an apartment complex in Huntington Beach,
Just craziness.
was captured on camera from her upstairs window.
For a little while after the story goes public, the neighbors do get some much-needed tranquility.
Laura ended up going to jail for about 2 months. So it was pretty quiet for 2 months, except for Bob blaming everything on me. He said that it was my fault she got arrested.
But then, Sarah and her neighbors manage to convince Bob that all they really want is to help him.
I were kind of like, look, Bob, like, we don't have any issues with you. Like, you went through some hell. You're living alone. So if you need help with anything, just give us a call. We'll come down and help you. So he was really nice after that.
Surprisingly, Sarah and Bob actually become friends. And when Laura is released from prison, they all agree to keep the peace.
Sometimes valuable friendships can develop from these traumatic events.
They had to all get together and work it out to resolve this conflict on their own.
And Sarah has learned an important lesson.
If you see something, if a neighbor that needs help, just try to reach out and get them help as best as you can, especially if it's causing an issue for your sanity. A happy ending was definitely needed.
In Montana, another violent situation leads to troubling questions about the people involved.
Do you know that they say love is blind? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, this couple actually proves it.
April 11th, 2016, Billings, Montana. A frightening armed robbery is underway at a local bar. It's 1:15 in the morning when security cameras at the Tap Inn capture a car pulling up outside. The driver stays in the getaway car while 3 armed robbers march into the bar.
2 males and 1 female. They were covered with bandanas, gloves, long sleeves, and they were armed with semi-automatic weapons. This is a violent crime.
But incredibly, despite the imminent danger, one cozy couple is too busy locking lips to pay any attention.
They were a little tipsy, they were kissing, they were really in the moment with each other.
Even as the thieves unload the cash register, weapons drawn, the kissing couple never even looks up.
Did they not even realize what was going on while they were making out?
This was a very serious situation here. We had an active armed robbery taking place right in front of them.
A whole minute passes by until the oblivious couple finally comes up for air and realizes the place is being robbed. But even then, they don't seem fazed.
Once they realize what's happening around them, these two are just very kind of just laid back, like, wow. Oh, wow, look, there's a robbery.
Whoever this kissing couple is, security cameras show them making out at the bar for a good 45 minutes straight before the robbers march in.
They were totally enamored with one another, and this is like a whole big love fest, and they were just so into each other that they had no idea what was happening.
The thieves get away with about $1,100 cash, some poker machine payout slips, and whatever else they can grab. The shaken bartender calls police.
Billings 911. Yeah, this is the Tap Inn Bar, 910 Broadwater. I just got robbed. All right, I've got 2 officers already headed your way. And the suspect just left. 3 of them, okay? We got it on video. They had black shirts, beanie caps, and then they had bandanas over their mouths. One of the suspects was a woman? Yeah.
The man behind the kiss turns out to be Chad Barnett, a local resident and regular customer at the Tap Inn. He says the whole scene unfolded in eerie silence.
They didn't even say a word. No one even screamed or, it was just super quiet. Everybody's just like.
And between the silence and the fact that he was very much into his makeout session, Chad admits that initially he was clueless.
We were just kind of into each other. I mean, what's wrong with that? I don't really know what was going on the other side of the bar. Obviously, I was busy and didn't really care.
But when he does look up, one of the robbers is right in front of him, and he's terrified.
He looked right at me, and I looked right at him, and I was like, oh, shoot, we're getting robbed. And the gal I was with, she kind of like buried her face in the side of my neck. She was super scared. She's like, what do I do? I'm like, I don't know, just don't make any sudden moves, don't do anything crazy.
Chad never says a word, but the thieves steal from him, too.
He took my phone and the change that I left on the bar.
When the police arrive, Chad is cooperative.
The cops came in, and obviously, they just questioned everybody. I was able to identify like 3 suspects. And then I pointed out to the cops, well, there probably had to be a 4th driver. They did actually review the footage and noticed that the driver didn't get out of their vehicle.
Billings has had a series of violent holdups, and police immediately suspect these are the same thieves.
Similarities in the cases started to emerge, such as one suspect hanging out near the doorway.
The lookout gal was the one standing by the door. She was the woman.
The common theme was that you had masked individuals that were fully covered, heavily armed, with bandanas over their faces. So a pattern began to emerge.
But rumors soon spread. Who are these robbers? And is this kissing couple as innocent as they seem? Why does Chad put his hand over his eyes at one point during the holdup?
A lot of people began to believe that because the kissing couple didn't react, that maybe they could be in on it.
These people could have been plants.
Well, new this morning, nothing can stop true love, or at least a good kiss. Not even armed robbers.
It doesn't take long for the video of the oblivious couple making out in the middle of a robbery to become a punchline.
It sounds like a joke. 3 gunmen walk into a bar.
This video went viral quickly, and someone mocking it, saying that love is blind.
Now, police say they are still looking for those suspects, but it's doubtful these eyewitnesses could really help them out.
The man in the video, Chad Barnett, is soon nicknamed the Tap-In Smoocher.
I'm like, well, this is going to get crazy really quick.
And Chad is right.
The very next morning, my buddy called me and he said, you know, you're on video at the Tap-In. I said, well, how do you know? And he's like, well, dude, you're at the Tap-In every weekend. Dude, it's your gray hat. It's just you.
As the video goes viral, rumors swirl about what Chad was really doing in the bar that night, and he's forced to speak up.
I had to clear my name because some people were saying that I was involved, and being how calm I was, thought that I had something to do with it.
Some are speculating these two were pretending to be so intimate. These people were there as a distraction, to distract the bartender. Meanwhile, they know exactly what's going on.
But Chad strongly denies that and says it really is as innocent as it looks. It all begins as a low-key Sunday night out with friends at another bar. But then, Chad runs into someone he hasn't seen in years.
The gal there that I knew from way back in the day, we went to the Tap-In, and her and I just kind of hit it off, and obviously you saw the video. You know, I was definitely into her and definitely inebriated.
She shies away from the media and manages to maintain her privacy, but they both strongly insist that the rumors are ridiculous.
People like drama.
Chad says people are making way too much of the whole thing, especially the part where it looks like he is covering his face.
Honestly, I don't remember really doing that. It was just probably a reaction at the time. It's probably like, oh my gosh, we're getting robbed.
And despite the rumors, police say the kissing couple were never suspects, pointing out that the couple did eventually react to the robbery.
It took about 10 seconds once this gentleman saw the guy grab his cell phone. Something was going on here.
And experts say the couple's calm response is actually smart.
Most of the time, it's very wise to not agitate the situation because attention could cause further violence.
If you can remain calm, that does tend to de-escalate that situation. The more you get them upset, especially if they're armed, this could have gone really bad. People could have been injured or even killed.
As for who was really behind the robbery, it turns out that within a 2-week period, there are 4 similar violent holdups in the area.
The Tap-In robbery was number 3 of 4 robberies, the 4th robbery being at a convenience store where the suspect actually discharged a round from a handgun and shot a cell phone right out of the clerk's hand.
And their motive seems to be the same.
Investigators soon believed that drug addiction, specifically methamphetamine addiction, played a role in these robberies. Robberies like this, where cash is what the robbers seek, is very common in cases involving those in addiction because they don't want to take the time to sell stolen merchandise. They need the cash now.
If they wanted to hurt somebody, they probably would have came in screaming. You know, I think they just want to come in and get cash.
Police believe the suspects have fled the Billings area, but they're confident they know who they are.
While investigators had developed a pretty good grasp of who was responsible for these robberies and identified a possible suspect vehicle and cell phone data, they still don't have that final piece of the puzzle enough to get an arrest warrant.
As for Chad, he says it's a night he and his kissing partner will never forget.
We're still good friends. And we laugh about it. Our little inside joke. Not thinking of myself as a tap-in smoocher. It's still kind of funny.
But they also realize how lucky they are.
I was obviously a little naive and probably a little more inebriated than I should have been. I look back and I think it could have definitely been worse. It probably scares me more now because I probably should have been paying more attention.
Tonight, a shoplifting showdown.
An alleged shoplifter stopped in her tracks.
You can't shoplift here.
Results in a tense confrontation.
Step away from me now.
This whole scene is very ugly.
And it's all caught on camera.
You're being filmed, ma'am.
She kept on getting more aggressive.
And later,
oh my God, he just went off the road.
a terrifying scene on a highway also unfolds with cameras rolling.
Oh, he just crashed into a car.
This was an absolute nightmare happening in broad daylight.
Oh, let me go.
She was screaming like she had a demon inside of her.
Let go.
March 14th, 2017, Hillsboro, Oregon. 16-year-old Cody Humans is hanging out with friends after school. They pick up some snacks at a local pharmacy.
We exited the store and we're just standing out front trying to figure out what we're gonna do next. All of a sudden we hear yelling and a whole bunch of commotion coming from inside the store. We look through the windows and we see all of this drama happening.
Let go. I'm not gonna let go. We're gonna call the police and deal with this the right way.
We run in there to see what was going on, and I start recording because I saw that there was like a tug of war going on.
It looks like the woman is shoplifting. The man is the store's loss prevention specialist.
Lots of retail chains employ loss prevention specialists. These are people dressed in normal, plain street clothes, walking the aisles, keeping an eye out for anybody with sticky fingers.
They're kind of like undercover employees, so they're not supposed to look as if they're security officers. And the reason they do this is because they don't want potential thieves to know that they're looking for them. There's a woman here who is apparently shoplifting, and there is a theft prevention worker who sees this. He decides that he's going to intervene, and then immediately she becomes really physically and verbally aggressive.
You're not gonna go anywhere. We're gonna call the police.
Yeah, you know what happens to you when you assault someone? You'll go to jail.
Good.
Someone.
Okay, when the police get it, we'll see.
Yeah?
We'll see, okay? Yeah.
Okay, yes, we will see.
We'll see.
The woman falsely claims that the employee has harmed her, but he just keeps trying to safely hold her until police arrive.
This specialist is really trying to use minimal force initially. He's holding the item, he's not holding her. He's trying to verbally negotiate with her.
You're not gonna go anywhere. We're gonna call the police.
So that she understands that he's just doing his job. They're trained to intercept people who are stealing from the store and then call 911 to get the police involved because they're not police officers.
But the woman continues to battle him for the purse, yelling the entire time.
You know what happens to you when you assault someone?
She was just trying to spit out random things because she was upset that she got caught. Of course, every shoplifter is like, you can't put your hands on me, let me go. He didn't assault you. He was just detaining you, doing his job because legally he was allowed to do what he needs to do to detain a shoplifter until police arrive.
But the woman is indignant.
You shoplifter. You can't shoplift here.
Yeah, why not?
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
You don't shoplift here. You can go somewhere else, but not here.
Fine, let me go somewhere else.
We hear the employee say, you can't shoplift here. Her response, unbelievably, is,
yeah, why not?
Well, why not? What an unusual thing to say.
She's trying to verbally negotiate her way out of the situation, gaslight him into thinking that he was the one that was doing something wrong.
You know what happens to you when you assault someone? You'll go to jail.
Trying to really manipulate her way out of the situation.
She felt like she was in the right. She felt like she had the right to do what she was doing.
Can you get him to let go of me, please?
Are they coming? Okay.
They're coming. Good.
Yeah.
We'll see.
You can't shoplift and think you're gonna get away.
You can't just grab someone.
Yes,
either.
I can. You shoplifted.
You just pushed me into the parking lot.
He was being professional about it, just doing his job. He wasn't like being too aggressive.
He is not going to let her leave the store. So she becomes more and more aggressive.
Let go of my purse.
Ma'am, oh, you gonna start kicking?
Yes.
As other people gather around, the situation escalates.
You gonna start kicking after shoplifting?
Other customers begin to sort of encroach in on the scene. But you jump into a situation like this, you could be the one getting kicked, you could be the one getting punched, you could be the one standing there if a gun comes out or a knife comes out. As other customers step in, this woman ups the ante. She gets more manic, she gets more loud, she begins screaming even louder.
Step away from me
No,
now.
yeah.
In my arm,
I did.
like that.
I sure did.
And this is the moment where we go from struggle to assault. And I don't know what they're paying this guy in this moment, but it's not enough to put up with something like this.
Oh, you gonna start kicking?
Yes.
The fact that this woman has engaged this man in such an aggressive and violent way kind of makes me wonder, what else was in that purse? This whole scene is very ugly.
Oh, really? I'm gonna take you down for that now.
Oh, I'm letting go.
She kept on getting more aggressive, screaming and yelling.
Let me go. Step away from me now.
No.
As the alleged shoplifter becomes more aggressive, the frustrated employee does his best to reason with her. But finally, he's forced to take action.
Oh, really? I'm gonna take you down for that.
That only makes her more angry because now she completely loses it. She begins kicking, she begins punching, she begins scratching.
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
And when she's on the ground, she keeps crying.
Oh, I'm letting go. Man, you need to chill.
You need to chill out.
She's playing the victim.
Let me go.
Calm down. Stop it!
This is something she's been claiming all along, that he had assaulted her, when the video evidence shows it was the opposite.
The other customers are trying to de-escalate things. They're trying to talk to her.
Man, you need to chill.
They're trying to convince her not to retaliate.
You need to calm down.
Stop it!
People really should leave this up to the specialist because they don't know what she's capable of.
I told her.
I like it.
So they really should not have intervened on a physical level. Someone who perceives the world as being dangerous or someone who is emotionally unstable may actually view being intercepted by a crowd of people as being attacked by a mob, and that may actually escalate them.
Let me go.
Especially if these people aren't trained in de-escalating agitated individuals.
Let me go.
Seeing a crowd against you may actually cause someone who is agitated to become even more physically violent.
Stop it! Stop it!
But this woman isn't giving up.
Step away from me now.
No.
Yes.
I work here, so no.
Yeah, that doesn't matter.
The situation is tense, and nobody seems to know how to respond.
Keep the line going. If you have something to check out, please.
Let go.
We have this very strange moment when another employee at the store begins directing people to the checkout, as if they're going to just casually buy the things they needed there and totally ignore this very violent and bizarre incident happening right next to them.
Let go.
But this is not business as usual.
Oh, really? Stop it!
Desperate to reason with the woman, a bystander points out Cody's camera, which is recording the whole incident.
Don't bite him either. You're being filmed, ma'am, and everybody is pointing out what you're doing.
I love the moment here when a woman tells her, "Ma'am, you're being filmed." You would think for most people that would cause them to pipe down, but it doesn't quite seem to have that effect on her.
They're trying to convince her that she's being taped and she's not going to get away with this, and nothing seems to be working. She's getting more and more violent and more aggressive, and she's determined to not let go of this purse.
Luckily, help arrives.
Just at the right moment, the police enter. And thank goodness, because this guy had been dealing with this woman now for several minutes.
Come here.
Can I have my glasses, please?
Turn around. Just behind your back.
He actually.
I don't care.
You know
You
that,
turn around
right?
on me, it's gonna be bad for you. You face the other way. Don't move. Got it?
Yeah.
Once the police arrive, her tune changes very quickly. She complies, and she's not quite as bold and not quite as assertive as she was earlier.
When the police arrived, her demeanor did change. She acted like she was innocent.
He actually
It seemed like she thought like, oh, nothing can happen to me. I'm above the law. I'm not going to get in trouble. That's why she walked away to the left with confidence. And that's when the police officer walked up to her and put your hands behind your back, you know, and then that's when she got patted down. And it was more like she just accepted it. It was like a flip of a switch.
The alleged shoplifter is identified as a 26-year-old woman, and police say she did have stolen items.
2 different items that she had stolen from the store that were inside her purse.
The store employees, including the undercover loss prevention specialist, are in the clear. He has shied away from publicity and tried to put the incident behind him.
This employee was within his legal rights to safely detain this woman who had just committed the act of shoplifting.
The woman is charged with third-degree robbery. The charges are eventually dropped without further explanation.
So it's possible that the charges were dropped because she had some psychological or medical condition that was somehow contributing to her behavior.
Perhaps it was because the value of the items that she stole was too low. We don't really know the details.
But whatever it was, she can't escape the court of public opinion. After Cody posts his video online the next day, it quickly goes viral.
I woke up, it's at like 30,000 views. I'm like, whoa, what is going on? And then every hour I checked, it was up like 30 more thousand views. It was like, what is going on? Video just kept on going and going and going with views, and it hit like 1 million views pretty quickly. And all these comments and all of these people trying to message me. I was getting interviews from news companies all around the world.
Tonight, a shoplifting showdown.
She started swinging at him and all that, and he warned her multiple times not to swing at him.
16-year-old customer Cody Humans shot the video.
It was insane. It was just a shock because I've never been interviewed on like TV everywhere. All my teachers and even my coworkers at the time where I worked were like, "You're famous now." It's like, I'm not famous.
But one thing is for certain, the message Cody believes his video conveys.
Don't shoplift, don't commit crimes, because it's just not gonna end well. Especially in a world where there's millions of cameras in every little inch of the world.
In New Jersey, another wild crime is also caught on camera.
Oh my God, he just went off the road.
June 29th, 2018, just after 5 p.m. Deacon John Barrett is heading home from work on the Jersey Shore.
It's a Friday afternoon. I'm looking forward to a great weekend with my family. I take 195, which is the road that crisscrosses New Jersey.
But suddenly, he sees a neon blue car making erratic moves in front of him.
He was just swerving around and at that point going slow and somewhat erratic with his driving. It was pretty clear this driver was in distress.
He's swerving across the lanes, and the dash cam captures every move.
John is alarmed. The reckless driver veers between lanes, barely missing other cars.
I get on the phone with 911 dispatch.
Yeah, you got a severely impaired driver, blue Toyota, and I have the license plate too. He's doing about 90 miles an hour.
As John talks to 911, the car picks up speed.
Oh my God, he just went off the road. He's back on. He's absolutely, we're coming upon exit 11. He's gone off the road again majorly.
John is worried, so he continues to follow the car, recording from a safe distance.
If somebody dies, if something happens that's terrible, he wants to be able to document it all properly.
Now, he's like an announcer, giving the operator a play-by-play of the unfolding danger.
He's already past exit 11, and looks like he's losing parts of his tires.
And this driver isn't slowing down.
He's at least 3/4 of a mile ahead of me, doing about 100 miles an hour.
Then, the out-of-control car crosses several lanes and slams into a sign.
Oh, he just crashed in a sign. She's crashed into a sign.
That sign just shattered. It must be at least 8 foot square.
Now, John realizes just how serious the situation has become.
Just took out a road sign. I just got hit with debris.
The sign goes flying over the car, as well as debris, parts of his bumper.
John is in the line of danger as well.
This was an absolute nightmare happening in broad daylight.
He's gone across the roadway. He's doing about 100 miles an hour.
As the car keeps going and keeps swerving, John prays help will arrive soon.
I'm on the phone with 911 dispatch, hoping that a police officer is going to come and intercept the vehicle.
Where are you in, sir? I'm in a red Optima, Kia Optima. Are you at Great Canada? Yes, ma'am.
But 7 miles into John's pursuit, there's yet another heart-pounding moment.
He's now going off the road. Almost went into an embankment. You got a traffic crew. He's coming up on mile marker 16. You got some form of emergency vehicles in the right-hand lane. Looks like a fire truck or something. He's now gone off the roadway again. He's gone sideways. He's now crashed into the other side, oncoming traffic.
I was just screaming out, hope this guy doesn't get hit by a truck.
Had this reckless driver crossed into oncoming traffic, the results would have been disastrous.
Instead, the blue car stays put and appears to have finally come to a stop.
As the car has spun out and stopped, I thought that the ride was over for the driver.
But it turns out the danger is far from over.
Just when he thinks that things are under control, they just get worse.
He's actually pulling away going eastbound.
After nearly 20 miles, John wonders if this wild driver is ever going to quit.
I'm saying to myself, God, please come down and stop this. Make sure this driver does something just to end this madness.
What if someone gets hurt or someone dies? When are the police going to arrive?
Then, in his rearview mirror, John sees emergency lights.
I see a trooper coming back. He's about a mile behind me.
But even with help on the way, the mayhem continues.
Oh, he just crashed into a car.
This is intense. How many people are going to get hurt before this ends?
He just ran a white car off the road.
But thankfully, that's when the trooper catches up to them.
The trooper's right there. He got him.
I don't know if the individual realized what kind of accident he just caused, but I was so happy it was over.
Now, it's unclear as to whether or not he pulled over because he actually hit another vehicle, or he sees the oncoming state trooper and realizes that he should probably get over.
John carefully pulls up behind the trooper with his dash cam still rolling.
Now, he's not really sure if this is over or not. You don't know what the state trooper is about to encounter.
Luckily, the driver cooperates and is arrested without incident. And John immediately calls his family.
My mind was racing. I was almost shaking, trying to regain my composure. This was a adrenaline-pounding moment. As a deacon, I don't have this kind of excitement in my regular work.
Police identify the erratic driver as 29-year-old Joseph Scott, a man who is no stranger to them and has a criminal history.
This was not the driver's first rodeo.
John shares his dashcam video with the local news.
A wild ride that's caught on a dash camera, a driver weaving in and out of traffic. This went on for miles. Look, even going off into the shoulder there. It was a good Samaritan who helped police get him off the road.
John suspected the driver might be on drugs, and he soon learns he was right.
While this was going on, Barrett was thinking this guy has to be impaired by something. He just didn't know what. New Jersey State Police say it turns out it was heroin.
State police find heroin and a syringe in Scott's car. He faces multiple traffic violations in addition to criminal charges for drug possession. John is just thankful no one was hurt.
When people see this video, they just can't believe that this driver continues. And one miracle after the next happens where the driver doesn't kill himself. I wanted to share how this video was a horrible video of somebody under the influence
Police commend John for doing a great job in a dangerous situation. And as his video goes viral, people call him a hero.
Within a few hours, I was getting 100,000 views, 125,000 views. And I kidded my 3 daughters to say, look, hey, this video is catching some attention. And now that over 7 million views, it's just amazing to me that so many people have seen it.
But John doesn't consider himself a hero. He says he's just relieved he was in the right place at the right time.
I feel very grateful that I was able to be there for this driver, be there for the other drivers. In that day, I may have helped save a life, but it could have been my children's life, it could have been my family's life that he could have taken out in a mere instant.
And after that day, John makes a habit of donating to charities that help those struggling with drug addiction.
The fact that somebody wasn't killed that day is a miracle unto itself. Horrible day, but certainly some positives have come out of this. If I can bring some awareness to this problem.
John's one regret is taking the Lord's name in vain on that 911 call.
Oh, he just crashed into a car.
As a deacon, it's certainly you don't want to use the Lord's name in vain, and my pastor has forgiven me.
And to help make amends, John now purchases dashcam cameras for family and friends.
You certainly should be in more cars than they are now. And when friends of mine have seen the video or they say, oh, I always wanted a dash cam, I give them a dash cam. You need to share your blessings with others. You need to pay this forward.
On the morning of August 30th, 1970, Rome awakened like it always did. The city, layered with centuries of history, moved at its familiar rhythm. Cafes prepared their first espressos of the day. Church bells echoed across ancient streets. Behind elegant facades, shutters opened to welcome the late summer sun. Nothing about that morning suggested that one of Italy's most infamous crimes had just unfolded. Behind the doors of an aristocratic apartment on Via Puccini, yet inside that luxurious residence, silence had already settled over 3 lives that would never leave the building alive. The apartment belonged to Camillo II Casati Stampa di Soncino, a member of one of Milan's oldest noble families. His wealth stretched far beyond the walls of his Roman residence. Castles, hunting estates, valuable properties in Rome and Milan, and even the private island of Zanon formed part of an inheritance that represented generations of privilege. To the outside world, he embodied the image of Italian aristocracy, immensely wealthy, passionate about hunting, horseback riding, and photography, a man whose family name carried centuries of prestige. Inside the apartment that morning were also Anna Fallarino, his wife, and Massimo Minorenni, a much younger man who had become closely connected to the couple during the final months of their marriage. When police arrived, they found 3 bodies. Anna Fallarino had been shot 3 times. Massimo Minorenni had been shot twice. Camillo Casati Stampa had turned the shotgun on himself. The physical reconstruction of the crime scene would leave little doubt about the sequence of events. Investigators concluded that Camillo had first killed his wife, then killed Massimo, before taking his own life. From a criminal investigative perspective, the case appeared almost immediately resolved. There would be no suspect to pursue, no lengthy search for a murderer, and no criminal trial waiting at the end of the investigation. Yet paradoxically, it was only after the shooting stopped that the real story began to emerge. Within days, investigators uncovered something few people outside the marriage had ever imagined existed. Hidden among the belongings inside the apartment were thousands of pages of journals, photographs, films, correspondence, and meticulous personal records. They revealed an intensely private world that had remained concealed behind the polished image of wealth and nobility. For years, Camillo had documented intimate aspects of his marriage in extraordinary detail. Every meeting, every participant, dates, locations, personal reflections, photographs, film recordings. The discovery transformed what initially appeared to be a tragic murder-suicide into one of the most sensational criminal cases in modern Italian history. Newspapers that first reported only the deaths quickly shifted their attention toward the extraordinary archive left behind by the man who had committed the killings. The public, initially drawn by the shock of violence among the aristocracy, soon became captivated by revelations that challenged conventional ideas about marriage, privacy, sexuality, and power. Italy in 1970 was still a society deeply influenced by Catholic traditions and conservative social values. Public discussion of intimate relationships remained limited, particularly among the country's elite families. The contrast between the respectable image of an ancient noble house and the contents of Camillo's journals created a media storm unlike anything many Italians had previously witnessed. The headlines became increasingly sensational. The private became public. The hidden became impossible to ignore. But behind every newspaper article and every public controversy stood three human beings whose lives had ended within moments of each other. It is tempting, when looking back at famous historical crimes, to allow the most sensational details to overshadow the individuals involved. The Casati Stampa murders have often been remembered because of the unusual circumstances surrounding the marriage or because of the immense fortune associated with the family. Yet reducing the case to scandal alone overlooks the irreversible human tragedy at its center. Anna Fallerino was no longer merely the wife of an aristocrat whose private life fascinated reporters. She was a woman whose life ended in an act of lethal violence. Massimo Minorenni was no longer simply described as a younger companion or participant in an unconventional social circle. He too became a victim whose future disappeared in an instant. Camillo Casati Stampa himself left behind a legacy forever defined not by his family's centuries-old name, but by the violence that ended 3 lives. As investigators examined the apartment, they were not simply documenting a crime scene. They were piecing together fragments of a marriage that, according to available historical records, had operated for years under arrangements that both husband and wife had accepted. Those arrangements, unusual as they appeared to the outside world, had remained hidden from public view. Their existence alone did not explain why violence eventually erupted. The evidence instead pointed towards something more complicated, a relationship built upon carefully maintained boundaries that, over time, no longer remained intact. One distinction would become central to understanding the events leading up to August 30th. Historical accounts consistently describe Camillo as someone who orchestrated and controlled the encounters involving his wife and other men. These meetings were not random discoveries nor secret affairs. According to the available documentation, they occurred with his knowledge and participation. He selected participants, observed the encounters, photographed them, filmed them, and later recorded extensive details in his journals. For years, that system appeared to function according to rules established within the marriage. Then something changed. Anna began seeing one particular man, Massimo Minorenni, outside the carefully controlled framework that had existed before. Their meetings no longer depended upon Camillo's supervision. The relationship developed independently. Historical sources describe this change as something Camillo found impossible to accept. The issue was no longer simply the existence of another man. Rather, it was the loss of the control that had defined the dynamic for years. What had once remained within boundaries established by the husband now existed beyond them. That distinction would become one of the defining elements discussed by historians and commentators for decades afterward. Even today, more than half a century later, the Casati Stampa murders continue to generate discussion not merely because of their shocking circumstances, but because they raise uncomfortable questions that remain relevant across generations. How can relationships founded upon mutual agreements collapse so completely? What happens when emotional attachment develops beyond rules originally accepted by everyone involved? Can wealth, privilege, and social status conceal personal instability rather than prevent it? Where should society draw the line between legitimate public interest and deeply personal privacy? And perhaps most importantly, when acts of extreme violence are later explained through jealousy or emotional collapse, do such explanations risk obscuring the reality that a woman lost her life? Modern interpretations increasingly encourage readers to examine this case through that final question, rather than remembering it only as an extraordinary scandal involving aristocrats and unconventional private lives. Many scholars argue that it should also be understood as an episode of gender-based violence in which sensational details must never eclipse the fact that Anna Fallerino became the victim of homicide. The archives left behind by Camillo Casati Stampa may explain many aspects of the marriage. They cannot justify the violence that followed. The immense fortune inherited across generations may explain why the case attracted extraordinary media attention. It cannot explain the irreversible decisions made inside that apartment. Nor can thousands of journal pages fully reveal what passed through the minds of the three people present during the final minutes before the gunshots shattered the silence of Via Puccini. Some questions would receive clear answers through physical evidence. Others would remain forever beyond the reach of investigators. Because the only three people who truly knew what happened inside that room all died before the police ever crossed the threshold. To understand how one of Italy's oldest noble families became forever associated with one of the country's most infamous murder-suicides, it is necessary to step backward, long before the morning of August 30th, 1970, and examine the lives of the people whose paths eventually converged inside that apartment. Lives shaped by privilege, ambition, unconventional choices, and ultimately irreversible violence. Long before the events of August 30th, 1970, before investigators cataloged evidence inside the apartment on Via Puccini, before newspaper headlines transformed an intensely private life into a national scandal, there are simply three individuals whose lives had followed remarkably different paths. Their backgrounds could hardly have been more contrasting. One inherited centuries of aristocratic privilege. One rose from modest beginnings into the highest levels of Italian society. The third belonged to a younger generation navigating a very different social world. Understanding those differences is essential, not because they excuse what eventually happened, but because they provide the context in which one of Italy's most notorious criminal cases unfolded. At the center of the story stood Camillo II Casati Stampa di Soncino. Born in 1927 into one of the oldest and most distinguished noble families in Milan, the Casati Stampa name carried centuries of history, influence, and wealth. Unlike individuals who gradually accumulated fortunes through business or politics, Camillo entered the world surrounded by privileges that had been established long before his birth. His inheritance was not merely financial. It was cultural, social, and symbolic. Every estate, every title, every family property represented generations of aristocratic tradition that had survived dramatic changes in Italian history. The family's holdings reflected extraordinary wealth. Historical records describe a collection of castles, hunting estates, valuable properties in both Rome and Milan, and ownership of the private island of Zanon. These possessions were not isolated investments, but components of an inherited world that offered privacy, prestige, and freedom unavailable to most Italians. They also created an environment in which much of life could remain shielded from public observation. Unlike ordinary citizens whose personal lives unfolded in crowded neighborhoods or small communities, members of the aristocracy often possessed both the physical space and the social influence to separate their private existence from public scrutiny. Camillo's interests reflected the lifestyle traditionally associated with his social position. He was known for his passion for hunting, horseback riding, and photography. Hunting occupied a particularly important place among Italy's aristocratic circles, combining tradition, sport, and social ritual. Large private estates provided ideal settings for organized hunting expeditions, where noble families and invited guests gathered far from urban centers. Photography, meanwhile, represented another enduring interest. Cameras allowed him not only to document landscapes, travels, and family life, but eventually to record far more intimate aspects of his personal world. At first glance, his life appeared to embody stability and privilege. Wealth insulated him from many of the financial uncertainties experienced by ordinary families. His surname commanded respect. His properties symbolized permanence. Yet history repeatedly demonstrates that privilege does not eliminate personal complexity. Material abundance cannot prevent emotional conflict, nor can inherited status guarantee healthy relationships. The Casati Stampa murders would later become a stark reminder that immense wealth and profound personal tragedy can exist side by side. If Camillo represented inherited aristocracy, Anna Fallerino came from an entirely different social reality. Born in southern Italy in 1929, Anna did not grow up surrounded by noble titles or ancestral estates. Historical accounts describe her background as modest. Like many young women of her generation, she sought opportunities beyond the circumstances into which she had been born. At one point, she hoped to become a film actress, pursuing a career that promised visibility, independence, and social mobility. Those ambitions, however, did not materialize as she had hoped. Her path instead led to marriage with an engineer named Giuseppe Drami. At that stage of her life, there was little indication that she would eventually become connected to one of Italy's wealthiest aristocratic families. Yet life often changes through encounters that appear ordinary in the moment, but later redefine everything that follows. In 1955, Anna met Camillo Casati Stampa. Their relationship developed despite the fact that both were already married to other people. Historical records state that each eventually ended those previous marriages, and in 1959, they married one another. From the outside, their union might have appeared almost like a modern fairy tale. A woman from a modest background entered one of Italy's oldest noble families, gaining access to a world that few people would ever experience firsthand. The marriage brought Anna into an environment shaped by extraordinary wealth. She now lived among grand residences, elegant apartments, private estates, and exclusive social circles. She became associated with a surname recognized throughout Italy's aristocratic community. Yet entering such a world also meant adapting to expectations and lifestyles vastly different from those she had previously known. Outward appearances often conceal realities invisible to everyone except those living inside a relationship. The Casati Stampa marriage would later become internationally known not because of its social status, but because of an aspect of the couple's private life that remained hidden for many years. According to historical documentation later recovered by investigators, Camillo maintained a pattern of behavior centered on observing intimate encounters involving his wife and other men. Modern descriptions commonly identify this practice as voyeurism. What distinguished the arrangement, however, was its structure. Available historical sources consistently describe Camillo as the organizer rather than an accidental observer. He selected young men, invited them into situations involving Anna, watched the encounters, photographed them, filmed them, and recorded detailed observations afterward. These activities were not isolated incidents, nor were they spontaneous. Instead, they formed part of an organized routine that continued across several years. The surviving documentation suggests that these encounters took place with the knowledge and participation of both husband and wife. This point is historically important because it distinguishes the early years of the arrangement from later developments. While the details understandably attracted sensational media attention after the murders, available evidence does not indicate that these encounters themselves directly involved criminal conduct. Rather, they reflected an unconventional private agreement that remained concealed from public view. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of this hidden world was Camillo's meticulous documentation. Investigators would later recover thousands of pages of journals. These were not casual diary entries. Historical accounts describe careful records listing names, dates, locations, descriptions of encounters, personal reflections, and accompanying photographs. The sheer volume of material demonstrated that recording events was itself an important part of Camillo's private life. Photography, one of his long-standing interests, became intertwined with documentation. Written notes and visual records existed together, creating an archive unlike anything investigators expected to discover while examining what initially appeared to be a straightforward murder-suicide. The journals would become one of the defining features of the entire case. They offered investigators an extensive chronology of events spanning years. At the same time, they raised difficult questions about privacy once their existence became public knowledge. Material never intended for public audiences suddenly became the subject of newspaper coverage. Throughout Italy, what had remained hidden inside locked drawers and private rooms was transformed into national conversation. Much of this private life unfolded away from Rome, on Zanone, the island owned by Camillo. Located off the Italian coast, Zanone provided precisely what great wealth often purchases most effectively: isolation. The island contained a villa where the couple spent summers and entertained guests. Removed from the constant observation of city life, it offered an environment in which activities could remain known only to those invited to participate. Historical accounts describe gatherings that included drinking, sexual encounters, photography, and private filming. These events remained confined to a relatively small social circle and were largely unknown outside. During the years they occurred, the geographical isolation of Zanone contributed significantly to the secrecy surrounding the couple's lifestyle. An island naturally limits casual observation. There are no unexpected passers-by, no neighboring apartments separated by thin walls, no crowds moving through public streets. Privacy becomes easier to maintain when access itself is restricted. For years, this separation from public life allowed the couple's unconventional marriage to continue without attracting widespread attention. Yet privacy should never be confused with permanence. Relationships evolve. Boundaries shift. Circumstances change. What functions under one set of emotional conditions may collapse when those conditions no longer exist. According to the historical record, the arrangement within the Casati Stampa marriage depended upon Camillo maintaining a central role in every encounter. He selected participants. He observed. He documented. Control remained a defining characteristic of the system. The existence of other men was, in itself, not unprecedented within the marriage. What mattered was that these interactions occurred within boundaries that Camillo himself established. For years, those boundaries appeared to remain intact. The journals continued. The photographs accumulated. The pattern repeated. To outside observers, the marriage still projected the appearance of wealth and aristocratic stability. Few people could have imagined the private reality existing behind that carefully maintained exterior. Newspapers had no reason to investigate. Society saw little more than another affluent couple moving within elite circles. It is worth remembering that Italy during the 1950s and 1960s was experiencing profound cultural transformation. The post-war years brought economic growth, expanding media, and changing social attitudes. Yet many traditional expectations remain deeply rooted, particularly regarding marriage, family, and sexuality. Against that broader social background, the private arrangements maintained by Camillo and Anna were extraordinary precisely because they diverged so dramatically from public norms while remaining almost entirely invisible. The contrast between appearance and reality would later become one of the defining themes of the case. An ancient noble family, a prestigious surname, magnificent estates, elegant residences, private islands. Behind them existed a marriage unlike almost any the public could have imagined. For years, those two realities coexisted without colliding. But hidden systems are often fragile. They depend upon every participant continuing to accept the same boundaries. The historical record suggests that this balance eventually changed when one relationship developed beyond the framework that had previously governed the marriage. That change would introduce a new figure into the story, not simply another participant in an established arrangement, but someone whose presence altered its very foundation. His name was Massimo Minorenni. His arrival would mark the beginning of the final chapter in the lives of Camillo Casati Stampa, Anna Falorino, and ultimately himself. The arrangement that had existed within the Casati Stampa marriage for years was unusual, but according to the historical record, it had remained remarkably consistent. Camillo selected the participants, observed the encounters, photographed them, filmed them, and documented them in meticulous journals. The existence of other men was never, by itself, the defining issue. Rather, the marriage appeared to function according to boundaries that both husband and wife had accepted over an extended period. Those boundaries, however unconventional they seemed to outsiders, relied upon one essential condition: Camillo remained the one in control. The structure did not simply involve participation, it involved supervision, organization, and documentation. Every encounter took place within a framework that he himself had created. It was this framework, not merely the intimate relationships themselves, that would eventually begin to unravel. Among the many men who entered the couple's private world was Massimo Minorenni. Born in 1945, he belonged to a younger generation than either Camillo or Anna. He was approximately 16 years younger than Anna Falorino, a difference that would later attract considerable attention in media coverage of the case. Historical sources describe him as someone who moved within circles connected to wealthy individuals. He had reportedly appeared in several softcore erotic films and was often characterized as a gigolo, who associated with affluent older women. Whether those descriptions fully captured his life is impossible to determine from the surviving record, but they illustrate how contemporary observers viewed his place within the social environment surrounding the Casati Stampa household. When Massimo first entered that environment, there is nothing to suggest that he would become fundamentally different from the other young men who had participated in the couple's unconventional arrangement. According to the available evidence, he was initially one among many. His presence fit within an existing pattern that had already continued for years. Camillo accepted his involvement under the same conditions that had governed previous encounters. The husband remained present. He observed. He photographed. He documented. Everything remained within the carefully controlled system that had defined a marriage. For a time, nothing publicly indicated that the pattern had changed. The journals continued. Life inside the aristocratic world maintained its outward appearance. The apartment in Rome remained a residence of privilege. The private island of Zanon continued to host gatherings away from public attention. To outsiders, the Casati Stampa household still projected stability. Yet relationships rarely remained frozen in time. Human emotions seldom obey systems designed to contain them. Even when individuals establish clear boundaries, those boundaries may gradually become more difficult to maintain. Historical accounts suggest that this is precisely what occurred. At some point, Anna Falorino began meeting Massimo independently, unlike the earlier encounters documented in Camillo's journals. These meetings no longer depended upon the husband's presence. They were no longer events that he organized or supervised. According to the historical record, Anna and Massimo developed a relationship outside the structure that had previously governed the marriage. This distinction is critical to understanding the final months leading to the tragedy. The issue was not simply that another man had entered Anna's life. Other men had done so before, and those relationships had unfolded within the unusual agreement that existed between husband and wife. What changed was that Anna's connection with Massimo ceased to operate within Camillo's carefully maintained framework. The relationship became personal, private, and independent. Historical sources consistently describe this development as something Camillo found impossible to accept. For years, he had exercised control over the circumstances surrounding every encounter. He decided who participated. He determined when meetings occurred. He documented every detail afterward. The arrangement functioned according to rules that he himself established. When Anna and Massimo began seeing one another without his supervision, that system no longer existed. Control had shifted. Whether the emotional impact came from jealousy, loss of authority, or a combination of factors cannot be established beyond the historical record. What is documented is that Camillo became intensely jealous after discovering that the relationship between Anna and Massimo had evolved beyond the limits he had previously accepted. The distinction may appear subtle, but it fundamentally altered the dynamics of the marriage. For years, Camillo had accepted relationships involving his wife because they unfolded within an environment that he managed. Now, according to historical accounts, Anna's relationship with Massimo existed outside his influence. What had once been carefully documented events became private meetings beyond his observation. The difference proved decisive. As the summer of 1970 drew toward its end, the three lives moved steadily toward the events that would forever define their names in Italian criminal history. On August 29, 1970, Camillo Casati Stampa was away from Rome. Historical records state that he had gone hunting with friends in northern Italy, pursuing one of the lifelong interests that had accompanied him since youth. Hunting had long formed part of his aristocratic lifestyle, providing not only recreation but also opportunities to spend time on rural estates far removed from the capital. During that trip, he telephoned Anna. The surviving accounts preserve only the essential information exchanged during that conversation. Anna informed him that friends were visiting the apartment in Rome. She also told him that Massimo Minoreni was present. According to the historical record, Massimo had come to discuss the possibility of obtaining financial assistance for opening a car dealership. The conversation itself appears straightforward. There is no documented transcript. No dramatic exchange has survived. No witness could later recount every word. What is known is what happened immediately afterward. Following that telephone call, Camillo made an abrupt decision. Instead of remaining where he was, he left northern Italy and began driving back to Rome during the night. The distance required a journey of several hundred kilometers. Hour after hour, he traveled south toward the capital. Exactly what occupied his thoughts during that drive remains unknowable. No journal entry records those final hours. No surviving witness could describe his state of mind inside the vehicle. History can document only the observable facts. He received the telephone call. He learned that Massimo was with Anna, and he immediately returned to Rome. By the time the city approached dawn on August 30th, his journey had come to an end. The apartment on Via Puccini remained quiet. Inside were Anna Fallarino and Massimo Minereni. Outside, Rome continued its ordinary routine, unaware that one of the country's most infamous crimes was only moments away. Historical reconstruction indicates that Camillo entered the building and instructed the household servant not to disturb him. The instruction itself appeared unremarkable. In affluent households, servants routinely respected the privacy of family members. Nothing in that request necessarily suggested violence. There was no indication that those within the residence anticipated what would happen next. Camillo then proceeded into the apartment. Inside the room were Anna and Massimo. What followed has been reconstructed primarily through physical evidence collected after the deaths. There were no surviving eyewitnesses. No participant remained alive to describe the final confrontation. Police therefore relied upon the positions of the bodies, forensic examination, and the physical evidence left at the scene. The weapon was a Browning 12-gauge shotgun. Investigators concluded that Camillo first turned the gun toward Anna Fallarino. She was struck 3 times. The injuries proved fatal almost immediately. The woman who had entered the Casati Stampa family more than a decade earlier, who had shared years of marriage with one of Italy's wealthiest aristocrats, died inside the apartment before any help could reach her. Camillo then directed the weapon toward Massimo Minereni. Historical accounts state that Massimo attempted to protect himself using a small table. The effort was unsuccessful. He was struck twice. He also died at the scene. Within moments, 2 lives had ended. The room that only minutes earlier contained conversation and movement had become a crime scene. The final act followed almost immediately. After shooting Anna and Massimo, Camillo Casati Stampa turned a shotgun on himself. He fired a fatal shot. His death ended any possibility of questioning him about his actions, intentions, or final thoughts. The only 3 people present during the shooting all died inside the apartment. Silence returned. Outside the room, members of the household remained unaware of exactly what had occurred until the sound of gunfire shattered the stillness. The servant, having heard the shots, alerted authorities. Police and emergency personnel arrived at the apartment. There was nothing they could do. Anna Fallarino was dead. Massimo Minereni was dead. Camillo Casati Stampa was dead. Because the suspected perpetrator had taken his own life immediately after the killings. Investigators quickly recognized that there would be no search for an unknown assailant. The physical evidence at the scene strongly supported the conclusion that this was a murder-suicide. From a purely criminal investigative perspective, identifying responsibility proved relatively straightforward. Yet while the immediate circumstances of the deaths became clear with unusual speed, the broader significance of the case was only beginning to emerge. As investigators secured the apartment and began cataloging its contents, they encountered evidence that extended far beyond the violence itself. Hidden within drawers, cabinets, and personal belongings lay an extraordinary collection of journals, photographs, films, correspondence, and records accumulated over many years. The apartment was no longer simply the location where 3 people had died. It had become the doorway into an intensely private world that almost no one outside the marriage had previously seen. Those discoveries would soon transform public understanding of the case. What first appeared to be a tragic but relatively straightforward murder-suicide would evolve into one of the most widely discussed criminal cases in modern Italian history, not only because of the killings themselves, but because of what investigators uncovered after the gunfire ended. The violence on Via Puccini lasted only moments. Its consequences would endure for decades. By the time investigators completed their first examination of the apartment on Via Puccini, one aspect of the case appeared unusually clear. Unlike many homicide investigations, there was no unidentified suspect to locate. No prolonged search for witnesses capable of identifying an unknown attacker, and no uncertainty about who had fired the weapon. The physical evidence at the scene pointed investigators toward a single conclusion. Camillo Tucasati Stampa had shot his wife, Anna Fallarino, then shot Massimo Minorini, before taking his own life with the same Browning 12-gauge shotgun. Because the suspected offender had died at the scene, the criminal investigation would not follow the path commonly associated with murder cases. There would be no arrest, no interrogation of the principal suspect, and no criminal trial in which prosecutors and defense attorneys would reconstruct competing versions of the events. Yet although the central question of who committed the shootings was answered almost immediately, another question soon emerged, one that would ultimately prove just as significant. Why had one of Italy's wealthiest aristocrats, whose marriage had for years operated according to an unconventional but apparently accepted arrangement, suddenly committed such irreversible violence? Investigators understood that the apartment itself might contain clues. Every document, photograph, letter, and personal possession had the potential to illuminate the background of the tragedy. What they discovered exceeded anything they could reasonably have anticipated. During the systematic examination of the residence, police recovered an enormous archive of private material accumulated over many years. Historical accounts consistently identify these materials as including thousands of pages of journals, photographs, films, correspondence, and detailed personal records. The volume of documentation alone immediately distinguished the case from ordinary homicide. Investigations. Many individuals keep diaries or preserve family photographs. Camillo's collection, however, represented something far more extensive. His records carefully documented intimate aspects of his marriage with extraordinary precision. According to the historical evidence, the journals listed the names of men who had participated in encounters with Anna, the dates on which those meetings occurred, the locations where they took place, descriptions of the events, Camillo's personal reflections, and photographic documentation that corresponded with many of the written entries. For investigators attempting to reconstruct the history of the marriage, the journals became an invaluable chronological record. Instead of relying solely upon the memories of acquaintances or fragmented testimony from friends, they possessed a detailed archive created by one of the central figures himself. Although those writings could not reveal his final thoughts on the morning of August 30th, they provided an extensive picture of how the marriage had functioned over a period of years. They demonstrated that the unusual arrangements later discussed by the press had not been isolated incidents. Rather, they formed part of a sustained pattern carefully recorded by Camillo himself. The discovery fundamentally altered the character of the investigation. Initially, police had been documenting a homicide scene. Now they were examining evidence that explained the broader context in which the killings had occurred. The journals confirmed that Camillo had long maintained an active role in organizing, observing, photographing, filming, and documenting intimate encounters involving his wife and other men. They also reinforced a distinction already suggested by historical accounts. For years, these activities had occurred within a framework that Camillo himself controlled. This background became increasingly important as investigators attempted to understand the relationship between Anna Fallarino and Massimo Minorini. Available historical sources indicated that Massimo had initially participated within the same system as other young men before him. The later development of an independent relationship between Anna and Massimo therefore represented a significant departure from the earlier pattern documented throughout the journals. Investigators did not need to speculate about the existence of the couple's unconventional private life because the documentary evidence established it directly. What the journals could not fully answer was how Camillo's emotions evolved as the relationship between Anna and Massimo changed. Diaries, however detailed, cannot always reveal the complete complexity of a person's emotional state. They provide perspective, not certainty. They record thoughts at particular moments, not every internal conflict experienced over time. Consequently, although the archive supplied remarkable context, it could not eliminate every unanswered question surrounding the final decision to commit violence. The discovery of photographs and films further expanded the scope of the investigation. These visual materials corroborated much of what appeared in the written records. Together, the journals, photographs, and films demonstrated that Camillo had systematically preserved evidence of activities that almost no one outside the marriage knew existed. Investigators therefore confronted an unusual situation. The person responsible for creating the archive had also become the person responsible for the killings. His records simultaneously documented years of private life and formed part of the evidence examined. After his death, as police completed their examination, another development began unfolding outside the apartment. News of the killings spread rapidly through Rome and then across Italy. At first, reports focused primarily on the immediate facts. A prominent aristocrat had killed his wife and another man before taking his own life. Even without additional details, the case attracted considerable public attention because of the Casati Stampa family's social standing and extraordinary wealth. Members of one of Italy's oldest noble families rarely appeared in criminal headlines. The combination of aristocracy, homicide, and suicide guaranteed widespread coverage. Yet the story changed dramatically once journalists learned about the existence of the journals and other personal materials recovered by investigators. What had begun as reporting on a murder-suicide gradually transformed into something much broader. Newspapers increasingly emphasized the extraordinary private archive discovered inside the apartment. Public fascination shifted from the shootings themselves toward the hidden life that investigators had uncovered afterward. The reaction reflected the cultural climate of Italy at the time. In 1970, the country remained strongly influenced by Catholic traditions and conservative attitudes regarding marriage and sexuality. Public discussion of intimate relationships, particularly among prominent families, remained relatively restrained. Against that social background, revelations concerning the Casati Stampa marriage appeared astonishing to many readers. The contrast between public image and private reality seemed almost impossible to reconcile. On one side stood an ancient noble family associated with wealth, prestige, and social respectability. On the other stood thousands of pages describing intimate arrangements that had remained completely unknown to the broader public. It was precisely this contrast that fueled extraordinary media interest. Journalists increasingly devoted attention not only to the crime itself, but also to the contents of the journals. The photographs, the films, and the broader questions they raised about the hidden lives of the Italian elite. The case rapidly expanded beyond criminal reporting. It became part of a wider national conversation concerning privacy, morality, journalism, and the responsibilities of the press. The existence of the journals presented newspapers with an ethical dilemma. On one hand, the materials were undeniably relevant to understanding the background of an event that had shocked the nation. They explained important aspects of the relationship between the three individuals whose lives ended on August 30th. On the other hand, those documents had never been intended for public audiences. They represented intensely private records created during a marriage that, however unconventional, had remained hidden from society for many years. As details entered newspaper coverage, many observers questioned where the boundary should be drawn between legitimate public interest and unnecessary intrusion into the private lives of the deceased. Those debates extended far beyond the immediate circumstances of the murders. They reflected broader tensions concerning the role of journalism in democratic societies. When a crime exposes deeply personal information unrelated to criminal liability, should every detail become public simply because investigators discovered it? Or should certain aspects remain private even after a case achieves national significance? The Casati Stampa murders offered no simple answers. Instead, they illustrated how criminal investigations sometimes uncover material whose historical importance coexists with profound ethical sensitivity. While newspapers concentrated on the sensational aspects of the archive, investigators themselves remained focused upon establishing an accurate factual reconstruction. The physical evidence, the positions of the bodies, the weapon, and the documentary materials all supported the conclusion that the shootings constituted a murder-suicide. Because the principal offender had died at the scene, no further criminal proceedings against an accused individual were possible. In practical terms, the investigation reached its legal conclusion relatively quickly. Yet the public life of the case had only begun. Every newly reported detail generated additional discussion. Every description of the journals encouraged renewed media attention. The murders increasingly became remembered not solely because 3 people died, but because the investigation exposed an intensely private world that challenged conventional assumptions about aristocratic life in post-war Italy. It is important, however, not to lose sight of the human reality beneath the extraordinary archive. Investigators examining journals and photographs were never merely cataloging historical curiosities. They were conducting their work inside a home where 3 people had died. Every document recovered from a drawer, every photograph placed into evidence, and every journal page examined by police existed because the investigation sought to understand the circumstances surrounding the violent deaths of Anna Fallarino and Massimo Minorenni, followed by the suicide of Camillo Casati Stampa. The archive explained the background of the tragedy. It did not diminish its consequences. As the formal criminal investigation drew to a close, one phase of the case ended. The facts surrounding the shootings have been established as fully as the available evidence allowed. The journals, photographs, films, and correspondence had transformed public understanding of the relationships involved. Yet another chapter was about to begin, not inside a criminal courtroom, since no trial would ever occur, but through legal disputes over one of Italy's most significant aristocratic fortunes, and through decades of historical reflection on a case that continues to provoke discussion about privacy, power, control, consent, and violence long after the investigation itself concluded. Unlike many of the true crime stories that continue to fascinate historians and documentary audiences, the Casati Stampa murders never progressed toward a criminal courtroom. There would be no indictment, no prosecution presenting evidence before a jury, no defense attorney challenging the state's reconstruction of events, and no verdict announcing guilt or innocence. The legal path that typically follows a homicide investigation ended almost as soon as it began. The reason was both simple and decisive. According to the investigation, Camillo II Casati Stampa had killed Anna Fallarino and Massimo Minorenni before taking his own life. Because the individual identified as the perpetrator died at the scene, criminal proceedings could not continue. Under those circumstances, investigators had one responsibility above all others: establish, as accurately as possible, what had occurred inside the apartment on Via Puccini and preserve the evidence explaining the sequence of events. Once that work had been completed, the criminal aspect of the case effectively reached its conclusion. Yet although there would be no criminal trial, the story itself was far from over. The deaths left behind questions that belonged not to criminal law, but to inheritance law, property rights, and the future of one of Italy's most significant aristocratic fortunes. They also left behind a public debate that would continue long after the official investigation had closed. The absence of a trial created an unusual situation. In many famous criminal cases, courtroom testimony becomes the primary source through which later generations reconstruct the events. Witnesses describe what they saw. Experts explain forensic findings. Lawyers examine contradictions. Judges summarize the evidence. In the Casati Stampa case, none of that occurred. Instead, historical understanding relies largely upon the investigative findings and the documentary material recovered after the shootings. That distinction is important because it reminds us that some questions can never be answered with absolute certainty. The available evidence established who fired the weapon and documented significant aspects of the marriage. But it could not produce testimony from the only 3 people who were present during the final moments inside the apartment. Their deaths permanently closed that possibility. Consequently, historians and commentators must distinguish between what the evidence clearly demonstrates and what remains beyond factual certainty. What is firmly established is that the investigation concluded the shootings constituted a murder-suicide. What is also established is that investigators recovered extensive journals, photographs, films, correspondence, and personal records documenting years of the couple's unconventional private life. These materials provided context for understanding the background of the case, but they could never function as substitutes for testimony that no longer existed. As criminal proceedings came to an end, attention increasingly shifted toward another matter of enormous significance: the future of the Casati Stampa estate. Camillo had belonged to one of Italy's oldest noble families and possessed an immense fortune. Historical accounts describe a remarkable collection of wealth that included castles, hunting estates, valuable real estate in Rome and Milan, and the private island of Zanon. The financial value of these holdings extended into tens of millions of dollars by contemporary estimates of the time. Such an inheritance inevitably raised complicated legal questions after the sudden deaths inside the Via Puccini apartment. The principal heir was Camillo's daughter, Anna Maria Casati Stampa, who was still very young when the tragedy occurred. The loss she experienced extended far beyond the inheritance itself. In the span of a single morning, she lost her father, while the violent deaths of Anna Fallerino and Massimo Minorenni simultaneously transformed her family name into one of the most recognizable in modern Italian criminal history. Although public attention often concentrated on the extraordinary value of the estate, it is worth remembering that behind every discussion of property stood a young heir confronting circumstances that few people could imagine. Historical records indicate that the inheritance became the subject of prolonged legal disputes. Given the scale of the fortune, such litigation was perhaps inevitable. Large estates frequently involve complicated questions concerning ownership, administration, and succession, particularly when deaths occur suddenly and attract widespread public attention. In this case, those legal proceedings extended well beyond the immediate aftermath of the murders. The estate itself represented generations of accumulated wealth rather than a single collection of financial assets. Properties connected to the Casati Stampa family carried historical, architectural, and cultural significance in addition to their monetary value. Decisions concerning their ownership therefore attracted attention extending beyond the immediate participants in the legal process. According to historical accounts, some of the family's prestigious properties would later pass into the hands of prominent figures within Italy's business and political world. These later transfers reflected how the consequences of the murders continued to shape the future of the family's legacy long after the criminal investigation had ended. Buildings that once symbolized aristocratic continuity gradually acquired new owners, new purposes, and new histories. The legal disputes surrounding the estate therefore became part of the broader aftermath of the tragedy. They demonstrated that the consequences of violent crime often continue through civil legal systems. Even after criminal responsibility has been conclusively established, while criminal law sought to determine how 3 people died, inheritance law addressed what would become of everything they left behind. Yet even as lawyers and courts address questions concerning property, public discussion increasingly focused upon another issue altogether: the extraordinary archive recovered during the investigation. The journals, photographs, films, and correspondence did not disappear after the case closed. Instead, they became central to the historical memory of the murders. Newspapers had already devoted extensive coverage to their existence, and the material continued to influence how the public understood the case. This development raised enduring ethical questions. How should society remember crimes that expose intensely private aspects of people's lives? To what extent should those private materials become part of the historical record? Does public curiosity justify unlimited exposure of documents never intended for public view? The Casati Stampa case offered no definitive answers, but it forced journalists, historians, and readers alike to confront these questions. Some observers regarded publication of the journal's contents as necessary to explain the background of the murders. Others argued that transforming intimate personal records into sensational headlines risked shifting attention away from the victims and toward scandal. This tension remains relevant today whenever criminal investigations uncover diaries, digital communications, or personal archives. The balance between public interest and personal privacy continues to challenge both media, organizations, and legal institutions. Another important aspect of the legal aftermath lies in what did not occur. Because there was no criminal trial, no court ever issued a judicial interpretation of Camillo's motives beyond the factual findings necessary to conclude the investigation. Modern discussions frequently reference jealousy, control, or the breakdown of the marriage. But responsible historical analysis must distinguish documented facts from speculation. The available evidence establishes that Anna's independent relationship with Massimo differed fundamentally from the earlier arrangements that had existed within the marriage. It also establishes that Camillo returned to Rome after learning that Massimo was present with Anna, and subsequently carried out the shootings before taking his own life. Beyond those established facts, caution is essential. Courts ordinarily evaluate competing interpretations through sworn testimony and cross-examination. In this case, that process never occurred because the person accused of the killings died immediately afterward. Consequently, the historical record remains necessarily incomplete regarding his final motivations. That incompleteness should not be mistaken for uncertainty about responsibility. The investigation clearly identified the sequence of events. Rather, it reflects the reality that human intentions cannot always be reconstructed with perfect precision once the central participants are no longer alive. The legal conclusion therefore rested upon evidence rather than speculation. Responsibility for the shootings had been established. Criminal proceedings were impossible because the perpetrator had died. Civil legal matters concerning inheritance continued independently. In many respects, the legal aftermath illustrated how different branches of the justice system address different questions. Criminal law determines responsibility for unlawful acts. Civil law determines the distribution of property and the resolution of competing legal interests. After death, the Casati Stampa murders required both systems to operate, but in very different ways. The criminal process ended almost immediately, while questions surrounding the estate continued long afterward. As the years passed, the murders themselves gradually entered Italian history. The legal files closed, the inheritance disputes progressed through the appropriate channels, and ownership of the family's remarkable properties evolved over time. Yet the public fascination never entirely disappeared. The combination of aristocratic privilege, extraordinary wealth, hidden private archives, and lethal violence ensured that the case would continue to be examined by historians, journalists, documentary filmmakers, and legal scholars alike. More importantly, changing social perspectives would eventually encourage many observers to reconsider how the story itself should be understood, not simply as an infamous scandal involving one of Italy's oldest noble families, but as a tragedy whose lasting significance extends beyond wealth, secrecy, and sensational headlines to broader questions about power, control, privacy, consent, and violence. Those reflections would become the final chapter in the enduring legacy of the Casati Stampa murders. More than half a century has passed since the morning of August 30th, 1970. Yet the Casati Stampa murders continue to occupy a distinctive place in Italian criminal history. Thousands of homicide cases have been investigated across Italy during the decades since, but relatively few remain the subject of sustained historical discussion, documentaries, books, and public debate. This case has endured not because it remains legally unresolved. It does not. Nor because investigators failed to determine what happened. They did. Instead, its lasting significance lies in the unusual convergence of wealth, aristocratic tradition, private secrecy, extensive personal documentation, media attention, and irreversible violence. It is remembered as a case that exposed not only the deaths of 3 individuals, but also a hidden world that many Italians never imagined existed behind the walls of one of the country's oldest noble families. Yet history often demonstrates that the details attracting immediate public fascination are not always the ones that matter most with the passage of time. In the days following the murders, newspapers understandably focused on the extraordinary revelations contained within Camillo Casati Stampa's journals. Their existence challenged assumptions about private life, marriage, and sexuality within the Italian aristocracy. Readers who initially opened newspapers expecting to learn about a murder-suicide instead encountered reports describing thousands of pages of intimate records, photographs, and films documenting years of unconventional marital arrangements. At the time, those revelations appeared almost unbelievable to a society still strongly shaped by Catholic traditions and conservative expectations surrounding family life. The contrast between the public image of nobility and the hidden reality discovered during the investigation generated enormous attention. Yet with historical distance comes a different perspective. Today, the journals remain important because they help explain the background of the case. But they are no longer its defining legacy. Increasingly, historians, legal scholars, journalists, and commentators encourage audiences to move beyond the sensational aspects and consider the broader human and social questions raised by the tragedy. One reason the case continues to resonate is that it illustrates how appearances can conceal realities invisible even to those living nearby. From the outside, the Casati Stampa family represented continuity, privilege, and stability. Their wealth stretched across castles, estates, prestigious properties, and a private island. Their surname carried centuries of social standing. To observers looking only at appearances, theirs was a life of extraordinary security. Yet the events of August 30th, 1970, revealed that material privilege offers no immunity from emotional conflict, fractured relationships, or violence. Wealth may purchase privacy, but it cannot guarantee emotional stability. Prestige may shape public reputation, but it cannot determine what occurs behind closed doors. The case, therefore, challenges one of society's oldest assumptions, that prosperity naturally protects families from tragedy. History repeatedly proves otherwise. Financial resources can transform lifestyles, but they cannot eliminate jealousy, conflict, heartbreak, or the consequences of decisions made during moments of emotional crisis. Another enduring aspect of the case concerns secrecy. For years, the private arrangements within Camillo and Anna's marriage remained almost entirely unknown outside a relatively small circle. The journals, photographs, films, and correspondence remained hidden inside private residences and personal collections. The island of Zannone provided geographical isolation where gatherings occurred beyond public observation. Everything about the couple's lifestyle depended upon privacy. Yet secrecy is rarely permanent. Sometimes it ends by deliberate choice. Sometimes it ends through accidental discovery. In this case, it ended because investigators searching a crime scene uncovered evidence that transformed private records into historical documents. The transition from secrecy to publicity occurred almost overnight. Material intended only for personal use became the subject of nationwide reporting. That transformation continues to raise ethical questions relevant far beyond this single case. Modern societies frequently struggle to determine where the boundary lies between legitimate public interest and personal privacy. Criminal investigations often uncover diaries, letters, digital communications, photographs, or other deeply personal materials. Journalists must decide what deserves publication. Historians must determine what belongs in the historical record. Readers must distinguish between information that genuinely contributes to understanding an event and details included merely because they attract attention. The Casati Stampa murders remain an important example of those dilemmas. They remind us that every archive recovered during an investigation once belonged to real people, whose private lives never anticipated becoming public history. At the same time, the case also demonstrates the historical value of documentation. Without Camillo's journals, investigators would have possessed a far more limited understanding of the marriage's background. The records established patterns that otherwise might have remained speculative. They confirmed that the unconventional arrangements described after the murders had existed over many years rather than emerging suddenly. The documented chronology, participants, locations, and personal reflections unavailable through any other source. For historians, those journals represent an unusually detailed primary record. For society, however, they also illustrate how documentation can survive long after the individuals who created it are gone, shaping how later generations interpret both private lives and public tragedies. Another reason the case continues to attract attention is its relationship to changing social attitudes. When the murders occurred in 1970, many reports emphasized the extraordinary sexual practices revealed during the investigation. The unconventional nature of the marriage often became the dominant feature of media coverage. Over time, however, interpretive priorities shifted. Contemporary scholarship increasingly encourages audiences to view the events through a different lens, rather than focusing primarily on scandal or moral controversy. Many modern commentators argue that the case should also be understood within the broader context of violence against women. This perspective does not deny the unusual circumstances surrounding the marriage. Those circumstances remain historically documented and are essential for understanding the background of the crime. Instead, it asks a different question when discussing the case. What receives the greatest emphasis? If public attention concentrates exclusively on sensational details, there's a risk that the act of lethal violence itself becomes secondary. Anna Fallerino's death may become overshadowed by endless fascination with journals, photographs, and unconventional relationships. Modern interpretations seek to correct that imbalance by reminding audiences that whatever arrangements previously existed within the marriage, they did not justify or excuse homicide. Anna was killed. Massimo Minorenni was killed. Their deaths remain the central human reality of the case. The existence of wealth, secrecy, or unusual private behavior cannot alter that fact. This shift in interpretation reflects broader changes in how many societies understand intimate partner violence. Crimes once described primarily as crimes of passion or tragedies driven by jealousy are now more often examined through frameworks emphasizing coercion, power, control, and a gender-based violence. Such approaches do not eliminate individual circumstances, but they encourage deeper reflection about the ways violence emerges when one person attempts to reassert control over another through lethal force. Within that broader conversation, the Casati Stampa murders continue to hold relevance. They illustrate how the breakdown of a relationship can culminate in irreversible violence whose consequences extend across generations. The case also reminds us of the limitations of historical knowledge. Despite the remarkable volume of surviving documentation, important questions remain unanswered. No journal records Camillo's precise thoughts during his overnight drive back to Rome. No surviving witness heard the final conversation inside the apartment. No courtroom testimony examined competing interpretations of the events because no criminal trial ever took place. The last moments of the three people involved remain known only through physical evidence and investigative reconstruction. That uncertainty invites humility. Responsible history distinguishes carefully between established facts and assumptions. We know who died. We know who fired the weapon. We know what investigators discovered afterward. Beyond those established facts, certainty becomes more limited. This distinction is especially important in famous criminal cases because public memory often fills gaps with speculation over time. The Casati Stampa murders deserve to be remembered according to the evidence, not according to myths that sometimes develop around notorious events. Perhaps the most enduring lesson lies in the contrast between permanence and fragility. The Casati Stampa family represented centuries of aristocratic continuity. Their estates, titles, and properties seemed to symbolize endurance across generations. Yet a single morning fundamentally altered that legacy forever. Today, when the family name is mentioned in discussions of Italian history, it is often associated not first with noble lineage or inherited wealth, but with the events of August 30th, 1970. History can preserve remarkable achievements, but it can also permanently attach a family name to a single act of violence. The legal disputes surrounding the inheritance eventually moved forward. Ownership of prestigious properties changed over time. The immediate investigation concluded. Newspapers stopped publishing daily updates. Life throughout Italy continued. Yet for the families of those who died, the consequences could never truly end. Every homicide creates circles of loss extending far beyond the individuals whose names appear in official reports. Relatives, friends, and future generations all inherit the emotional weight of events they did not choose. That reality is easy to overlook when famous cases become historical narratives. True crime often emphasizes investigation, evidence, and dramatic turning points. Equally important, however, is remembering that every case begins and ends with human lives. The Casati Stampa murders are no exception. Behind the headlines about aristocracy, wealth, journals, and scandal were three people whose futures ended inside an apartment on Via Puccini. Anna Fallerino would never grow older. Massimo Minorenni would never have the opportunity to build the future he had discussed only hours before his death. Camillo Casati Stampa's life likewise ended by his own hand immediately after committing irreversible acts of violence that forever transformed his family's history. More than 50 years later, the apartment on Via Puccini belongs to history rather than current investigation. The shotgun has long since become evidence preserved in records rather than an active instrument of violence. The journals have become historical documents instead of private possessions. The legal files have closed. The estate has passed through subsequent chapters of ownership. Yet the questions raised by the case continue to speak across generations. They ask us to consider the limits of privacy, the responsibilities of journalism, the complexities of consent, the dangers of control within intimate relationships, and the devastating permanence of lethal violence. Above all, the case reminds us that beneath every sensational headline lies a tragedy measured not by newspaper circulation, public curiosity, or historical notoriety, but by lives that cannot be restored. The Casati Stampa murders endure in public memory because they revealed a hidden world. But they should be remembered with equal clarity for something far simpler and far more important. Behind the extraordinary circumstances stood three ordinary human truths that remain unchanged in every generation. Trust can be broken. Violence can never be undone. And once a life is taken, no amount of wealth, status, or history can bring it back. When history remembers a notorious crime, memory often becomes selective. Certain images survive while others gradually disappear. Headlines outlive court files. Sensational details overshadow ordinary human realities. Over time, complex events are compressed into a few recognizable phrases that seem to explain everything while, in truth, explaining very little. The Casati Stampa murders are a powerful example of this process. Mention the case today, and many people immediately think of aristocratic wealth, secret journals, a private island, unconventional relationships, or one of Italy's greatest social scandals. Those elements are undeniably part of the historical record. They help explain why the case became one of the most discussed crimes in 20th century Italy. Yet they should never become the entire story. At its heart, this was not simply a scandal involving the private lives of the wealthy. It was a tragedy in which three people lost their lives, leaving behind unanswered questions that no investigation could ever fully resolve. Looking back across more than 5 decades, the sequence of events appears deceptively straightforward. Camillo II Casati Stampa di Soncino, heir to one of Milan's oldest aristocratic families, possessed immense wealth and enjoyed a life defined by privilege. His marriage to Anna Fallerino developed within an unconventional framework that, according to the historical record, both husband and wife accepted for many years. Camillo organized intimate encounters involving Anna and younger men, observed them, photographed them, filmed them, and documented them in meticulous journals. Among those men was Massimo Minorenni, who initially entered the couple's private world under the same conditions as others before him. Eventually, however, Anna and Massimo formed an independent relationship beyond Camillo's supervision. Historical accounts consistently identify that development as the decisive turning point. On August 29, 1970, while away on a hunting trip in northern Italy, Camillo telephoned Anna and learned that Massimo was visiting the apartment in Rome, reportedly to discuss financial assistance for opening a car dealership. Camillo immediately abandoned his trip, drove several hundred kilometers back to the capital during the night, entered the apartment on Via Puccini the following morning, instructed a servant not to disturb him, shot Anna 3 times, shot Massimo twice as he attempted to shield himself with a small table, and then ended his own life with the same Browning 12-gauge shotgun. Investigators reconstructed the sequence from physical evidence, concluding that the case was a murder-suicide. The criminal investigation, therefore, ended quickly because the perpetrator had died at the scene. Had the story concluded there, it would still have represented a significant tragedy involving one of Italy's aristocratic families. Instead, the investigation uncovered something extraordinary. Police recovered thousands of pages of journals together with photographs, films, correspondence, and extensive personal records documenting years of Camillo's private life. Those discoveries transformed public understanding of the case almost overnight. Newspapers shifted their attention from the shootings themselves to the remarkable archive found inside the apartment. The existence of such detailed documentation astonished a society still deeply influenced by conservative cultural values and Catholic traditions. For many readers, the revelations appeared almost as shocking as the killings themselves. The contrast between public respectability and hidden private behavior fueled months of discussion, debate, and speculation. Yet this media fascination also created a lasting imbalance in how the case was remembered. The journals became famous. The photographs attracted enormous curiosity. The unusual nature of the marriage dominated countless articles and later documentaries. Meanwhile, the human cost of the violence risked fading into the background. This tendency illustrates a broader challenge within true crime itself. Stories involving famous individuals, unusual circumstances, or hidden secrets often become remembered for their most sensational features rather than for the irreversible harm they caused. Responsible historical reflection requires resisting that temptation. The Casati Stampa murders deserve attention not because they satisfy curiosity about aristocratic private lives, but because they reveal how quickly lives can be destroyed when violence replaces communication, and control becomes inseparable from possession. Another reason the case continues to resonate is that it illustrates the limits of power. Camillo possessed extraordinary advantages by almost every measurable standard. He inherited immense wealth. He belonged to one of Italy's oldest noble families. He owned castles, estates, valuable urban properties, and even a private island. Such privilege provided opportunities unimaginable to most people. Yet the events of August 1970 demonstrate that wealth cannot purchase emotional security. It cannot guarantee healthy relationships. It cannot eliminate jealousy, fear, disappointment, or grief. History repeatedly reminds us that emotional conflict respects no social class. The circumstances surrounding the Casati Stampa family therefore challenged the comforting assumption that material success naturally protects individuals from personal tragedy. They do not. In fact, great wealth sometimes creates greater privacy, allowing relationships to develop beyond public observation for years before hidden tensions become visible. Privacy itself occupies another central place in the legacy of this case. Throughout their marriage, Camillo and Anna lived much of their unconventional private life away from public attention. Their gatherings on Zannone Island remained known only to invited participants. The journals remained locked away inside private collections. The photographs and films existed solely within the boundaries of personal possession. Nothing suggests that those records were created with any expectation that strangers would one day study them. Yet once investigators discovered the archive during a homicide investigation, intensely private material entered the public domain. Even decades later, historians continue to debate where the line should be drawn between public interest and personal privacy. The journals undoubtedly help explain the background of the murders. Without them, understanding the history of the marriage would be far more difficult. At the same time, their publication raises enduring ethical questions. How much of a deceased person's private life becomes legitimate public knowledge once it forms part of a criminal investigation? Should every intimate detail uncovered by police automatically become historical evidence available for public consumption? Or do individuals retain some measure of privacy even after death? The Casati Stampa case offers no definitive solution, but it continues to serve as an important example whenever journalists and historians confront similar dilemmas. Equally significant is the evolution of how the case itself has been interpreted. Contemporary reporting often emphasized the extraordinary sexual aspects of the marriage because those details seemed unprecedented within the context of Italian aristocratic society. Modern scholarship increasingly adopts a different perspective. While acknowledging the documented nature of the couple's consensual private arrangements, many recent commentators argue that the killings should also be understood within the broader framework of violence against women. This interpretation does not erase the historical context. Instead, it reorders the priorities through which the story is remembered. The central issue becomes not whether the marriage was unconventional, but that Anna Fallerino was killed. Whatever agreements had previously existed between husband and wife, they ended with an act of lethal violence that no private arrangement could justify. Massimo Minorini likewise lost his life. His participation in the couple's earlier arrangements did not diminish his humanity or alter the reality that he became a victim of homicide. Modern audiences, therefore, increasingly recognize that sensational background should never eclipse the suffering of those whose lives ended. The case also serves as a reminder of the limitations inherent in every historical investigation. We possess detailed journals documenting years of Camillo's thoughts and activities. Yet we do not possess a record of his final internal reflections during the overnight drive from northern Italy to Rome. We know he received Anna's telephone call. We know he immediately returned. We know what investigators concluded happened inside the apartment. But the exact words spoken during the final confrontation, the final expressions exchanged among the three people present, and the complete emotional landscape of those final minutes disappeared forever with their deaths. Such uncertainty is not unusual in homicide investigations where no witnesses survive. It reminds historians to distinguish carefully between evidence and imagination. Responsible storytelling begins by respecting the boundaries of what can genuinely be known. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Casati Stampa murders is that control is never the same as understanding. Throughout the documented history of the marriage, Camillo meticulously organized encounters, selected participants, photographed events, and recorded observations with extraordinary precision. The journals suggest a desire to document every detail, preserving experiences through words and images as though complete records might somehow preserve complete control. Yet human relationships cannot be reduced to documentation. Emotions evolve independently of carefully constructed systems. Affection cannot be permanently regulated by rules. Trust cannot be guaranteed through observation. Love cannot be archived in photographs. The tragedy of August 30th, 1970, illustrates the moment when a structure built upon control encountered a reality that control could no longer contain. Ultimately, the Casati Stampa murders endure because they force us to confront uncomfortable truths about human relationships rather than simply extraordinary facts about aristocratic life. They remind us that appearances often conceal complexities invisible to outsiders. They demonstrate that privacy and secrecy are not identical concepts. They show that immense privilege cannot prevent devastating personal collapse. Most importantly, they reinforce a principle that extends far beyond this single historical case. No matter how unusual the circumstances surrounding a relationship may be, violence is never transformed into something understandable simply because it follows emotional conflict. Once a firearm is raised, every earlier agreement, every private arrangement, every hidden secret, and every social privilege becomes insignificant beside the irreversible reality of lives lost. More than 50 years after the gunshots echoed through the apartment on Via Puccini, The journals remain preserved as historical documents. The investigation remains part of Italy's criminal history, and the case continues to be analyzed by scholars, journalists, and documentary filmmakers. But beyond the archives, beyond the headlines, and beyond the fascination that has surrounded the case for generations, lies its simplest and most enduring truth. 3 people entered the final morning of August 30th, 1970, alive. None of them left the apartment alive. Everything else, the wealth, the aristocratic title, the sensational reporting, the private records, the legal disputes, and the decades of public discussion, exists only because of that irreversible fact. It is the tragedy itself, rather than the scandal that followed it, that deserves to remain at the center of history's memory. Every true crime story eventually reaches a point where the evidence has been examined, the timeline has been reconstructed, and the legal questions have been answered as completely as circumstances allow. After that point, another kind of question begins to emerge, one that belongs not to detectives, prosecutors, or forensic experts, but to history itself. Why does this particular case continue to be remembered when so many others gradually disappear from public consciousness? What makes one tragedy become a permanent chapter in a nation's collective memory, while countless, equally devastating crimes fade into archival records? In the case of the Casati Stampa murders, the answer cannot be reduced to a single explanation. It was not merely the aristocratic title, although the prominence of the Casati Stampa family undoubtedly attracted attention. It was not simply the enormous fortune that surrounded the family, although wealth inevitably intensified public curiosity. It was not even the extraordinary journals, photographs, or films discovered during the investigation, despite the remarkable influence those materials had on newspaper coverage throughout Italy. Rather, the enduring power of this case lies in the intersection of all those elements with one irreversible act of violence that permanently altered the lives of everyone connected to it. The story begins as one of privilege, secrecy, and unconventional private choices. But it ends where every homicide ultimately ends, with loss that cannot be repaired. Looking back from the perspective of more than 50 years. One of the most striking aspects of the case is how dramatically public perception evolved over time. During the months immediately following the murders, much of the attention centered upon the hidden world uncovered inside the Via Puccini apartment. Readers were fascinated by the revelation that one of Italy's wealthiest aristocrats had meticulously documented years of intimate encounters involving his wife and numerous young men. In 1970, those discoveries appeared almost unimaginable within a society still profoundly shaped by traditional expectations surrounding marriage, family, and sexuality. The journals became symbols of a hidden aristocratic culture that few members of the general public had ever suspected existed. Newspapers competed to report new details, and the case rapidly became one of the defining media stories of its era. Yet history has a way of reshaping priorities. What once seemed to be the central scandal gradually became historical context rather than historical conclusion. Modern readers approaching the case often recognize that the journals, however extraordinary, explain only the background against which the tragedy unfolded. They are not the tragedy itself. The tragedy occurred when 3 lives ended inside an apartment on Via Puccini. Everything else belongs to the circumstances surrounding that event. This distinction may seem simple, but it is essential. Without it, true crime risks becoming entertainment built upon human suffering rather than an opportunity to understand the consequences of violence. The Casati Stampa case, therefore, offers an important lesson for anyone interested in criminal history. Curiosity should always remain secondary to compassion. Documents, photographs, and sensational details may explain how events developed, but they should never eclipse the people whose lives were irreversibly changed. Another enduring lesson concerns the nature of control. According to the historical record, Camillo spent years constructing an environment in which every intimate encounter involving his wife occurred within boundaries that he established. He selected participants, observed events, photographed them, filmed them, and recorded detailed reflections afterward. Few individuals have ever documented their private lives with such extraordinary precision. Yet no amount of documentation could preserve the emotional stability upon which that system depended. Human relationships possess an essential unpredictability that resists complete regulation. Feelings evolve, trust changes, affection deepens or fades. No archive, however comprehensive, can prevent those transformations. In retrospect, the journals almost symbolize an attempt to capture permanence in a realm where permanence rarely exists. Every page sought to preserve a moment. Every photograph fixed an image. Every written observation attempted to define an experience. Yet despite thousands of pages of records, the one thing that ultimately escaped documentation was the emotional collapse that preceded the violence. The final decisions made during the early hours of August 30th, 1970, cannot be fully reconstructed because the only 3 people who witnessed them all died before they could speak. That silence remains one of the case's most haunting characteristics. It reminds us that historical evidence, however extensive, always possesses limits. There are moments in every criminal investigation that disappear forever once those directly involved are gone. Equally significant is what the case reveals about privacy. Throughout their marriage, Camillo and Anna succeeded in maintaining an intensely private world largely hidden from society. Their gatherings on Zanon Island occurred away from public observation. Their photographs remained inside private collections. Their journals rested unseen until investigators opened drawers after the murders. For years, the separation between public identity and private reality remained almost complete. Then, within days, that separation vanished. Material created for no audience beyond its author became front-page news throughout Italy. This transformation continues to resonate in an era very different from 1970. Today, private communications are often stored digitally rather than on paper. Personal photographs exist on electronic devices rather than in printed albums. Diaries have frequently been replaced by emails, text messages, or digital journals. Yet the ethical questions remain remarkably similar. When a criminal investigation uncovers intensely personal material, how much of it should become public? What responsibilities do journalists bear when reporting information that may satisfy curiosity, but also intrudes upon the dignity of the deceased? The Casati stamp of murders remain relevant precisely because they force us to confront these difficult questions without offering easy answers. They remind us that every investigative discovery involves real people whose private lives deserve thoughtful consideration even after death. The evolution of public discussion surrounding Anna Fallarino represents another meaningful change. Early reporting often portrayed her primarily within the context of the unusual marriage that investigators uncovered. Contemporary analysis increasingly emphasizes something different. Modern scholars and commentators frequently argue that Anna should also be remembered as a woman whose life ended in an act of lethal violence committed by her husband. This shift reflects broader changes in how societies understand domestic homicide and violence against women, rather than allowing sensational circumstances to dominate the narrative indefinitely. Many historians now encourage audiences to place the victims themselves at the center of the story. Such an approach does not ignore the complexities of the marriage. Those complexities remain historically documented and are necessary for understanding the background of the crime. Instead, it recognizes that no consensual private arrangement can justify murder. Whatever agreements previously existed between husband and wife, they cease to matter the moment violence replaced consent. Massimo Minorini likewise deserves remembrance, not merely as a participant in an unusual social circle, but as a human being whose future ended violently inside the apartment that morning. Historical records describe him as someone hoping to discuss financial support for a business venture. Whether that conversation would ultimately have succeeded no longer matters. Like Anna, he lost every opportunity for the future when the shooting began. The passage of time has also transformed the symbolic meaning of the Casati stamp of fortune. At the moment of the murders, newspapers naturally emphasized the enormous wealth involved. Castles, prestigious properties, hunting estates, and a private island represented extraordinary privilege. Legal disputes concerning the inheritance attracted widespread attention. Yet from today's perspective, the fortune appears almost secondary. The properties eventually changed ownership. The legal proceedings concluded. Material wealth continued its ordinary historical journey from one generation to another. What endured was not ownership, but memory. The family name became permanently associated with a single morning in August 1970 rather than centuries of aristocratic history. In this sense, the case offers a sobering reminder that reputation, unlike property, can be transformed instantly by acts of violence. No amount of inherited prestige can prevent history from redefining how future generations remember a family. There is also an important lesson for those who consume true crime as a form of education or entertainment. Cases like the Casati stamp of murders demonstrate why responsible storytelling matters. It is easy to construct narratives that exaggerate mystery where little exists or sensationalize private behavior because it attracts attention. Such approaches may increase dramatic appeal, but they risk distorting historical truth. Responsible storytelling instead begins with evidence. It distinguishes documented facts from speculation. It acknowledges uncertainty where uncertainty exists. Most importantly, it remembers that every victim was a real person rather than merely a character within an engaging narrative. The responsibility of historical storytelling is therefore not simply to recount events, but to preserve their humanity. As this story comes to an end, it is worth returning to the apartment on Via Puccini, not as it appeared in newspaper photographs or investigative reports, but as an ordinary home before history forever altered its meaning. On the evening before the murders, it remained simply a residence where conversations took place. Plans were discussed, and daily life continued. By the following morning, it had become one of Italy's most famous crime scenes. Such transformations remind us how fragile ordinary life can be. The boundary separating routine existence from irreversible tragedy is sometimes measured not in years or months, but in moments. That truth extends far beyond this particular case. Every homicide recorded in historical archives began as an ordinary day for someone who did not know. It would be their last. In remembering the Casati stamp of murders, perhaps the most meaningful tribute is not continued fascination with scandal, but continued commitment to understanding the value of empathy, restraint, and respect for human dignity. The extraordinary circumstances surrounding the case should never obscure its simplest reality. 3 people entered the final chapter of their lives, carrying different histories, different hopes, and different futures. None of those futures survived the morning of August 30th, 1970. The journals became historical artifacts. The estates became inherited property. The headlines became archival records. But the loss remained permanent. And perhaps that is the final lesson the case leaves behind. Long after wealth has changed hands, long after sensational details have faded, and long after public curiosity has moved on to newer stories. The true measure of every crime remains unchanged. It is found not in the notoriety of the perpetrator, not in the value of an inheritance, not in the volume of media coverage, and not in the mysteries that continue to invite discussion. It is found in the lives that were interrupted, the families forever altered, and the reminder that violence always leaves consequences reaching far beyond the moment in which it occurs. That truth, more than any headline or historical curiosity, is the legacy that deserves to endure. In the years following the Casati Stampa murders, the case gradually shifted from immediate news event to long-term cultural reference point, but not in the way most criminal cases do. Many homicides fade into statistical memory, remembered only in legal archives or local records. This case, however, remained unusually visible, repeatedly resurfacing in discussions of Italian society in the late 20th century. The reason was not only the violence itself, but the way in which the investigation had exposed a private world that collided with public morality, journalism, and the boundaries of acceptable disclosure. In the immediate aftermath of the discovery of Camillo Casati Stampa's journals, Italian media entered a period of intense and sustained coverage. Newspapers did not simply report the existence of the documents. They interpreted them, debated them, and in many cases sensationalized their contents. The aristocratic identity of the family amplified this effect. The Casati Stampa name carried centuries of historical weight in Milanese nobility, and the idea that such a family could be associated with a hidden archive of sexual documentation and unconventional relationships created a narrative tension that journalism of the period struggled to resist. This media attention contributed to the case becoming something more than a criminal investigation. It became a mirror through which Italian society examined its own contradictions. On one side stood a culture still heavily influenced by Catholic tradition, where public discussion of sexuality remained constrained and often moralized. On the other side was a rapidly modernizing post-war Italy, already experiencing the cultural shifts of the late 1960s and early 1970s, where private behavior among elites did not always align with public norms. The Casati Stampa case existed at the intersection of these two Italies, the traditional and the emerging, the private and the exposed. As reporting expanded, so too did interpretive framing. Early accounts often focused on shock and scandal, emphasizing the existence of journals, photographs, and recorded sexual encounters. Over time, however, a second layer of interpretation emerged, particularly among writers and scholars looking back with historical distance. In this view, the case was not only about scandalous private behavior, but about control, emotional dependency, and the consequences of relationships in which boundaries, however unconventional, began to shift and destabilize. One of the most significant aspects of this long-term reflection is how differently Anna Fallarino has been positioned in historical memory compared to the initial wave of reporting. In early media narratives, she was frequently described in relation to the unusual structure of her marriage, often defined through the lens of Camillo's journals and documented arrangements. Later interpretations increasingly emphasize her as an individual whose life was ultimately cut short by lethal violence, shifting the focus away from voyeuristic fascination and toward victim-centered understanding. This evolution reflects broader changes in how societies interpret cases involving intimate relationships that end in homicide. The same reevaluation applies to Massimo Minorenni. Initially, much of the attention surrounding him in media coverage was filtered through his role within the couple's private world and his connection to aristocratic circles. In later historical treatments, however, He is more consistently recognized simply as a victim of the shooting, someone whose personal aspirations, such as the reported intention to establish a car dealership, were abruptly and permanently interrupted. This shift in framing is significant because it moves the narrative away from the architecture of the private arrangements and back toward the irreversible outcome of violence. Meanwhile, the figure of Camillo Casati Stampa has remained complex and difficult to reduce to a single interpretation. The existence of extensive journals and visual records ensures that he is not remembered solely as the perpetrator of a crime, but also as someone who documented his life with unusual intensity. Yet the final act of violence dominates his historical legacy. Over time, the tension between these two dimensions, documenter and killer, has become one of the defining interpretive challenges of the case. Some analyses focus on psychological control, others on jealousy, others on the breakdown of relational boundaries. But no interpretation can change the established fact that he committed the killings before taking his own life. From a legal standpoint, the case remains straightforward. The investigation concluded that a murder-suicide had taken place, and no criminal proceedings followed due to the death of the perpetrator at the scene. However, the absence of a trial has had a lasting effect on how the case is discussed. Without courtroom testimony, cross-examination, or judicial reasoning, the narrative rests entirely on investigative reconstruction and documentary evidence. This has created space for interpretation, debate, and, at times, speculation. It is one of the reasons the case continues to appear in historical discussions even decades later. Another enduring element is the estate itself and what it represented within Italian aristocratic history. The Casati Stampa properties, castles, estates, urban residences, and the island of Zanon symbolized a form of inherited continuity that was already becoming less central in post-war Italy. The eventual redistribution and transfer of these assets in the years following the murders marked not only a legal transition, but also a symbolic one. The gradual transformation of aristocratic holdings into modern private ownership structures. While these legal and financial processes followed their own path, they inevitably remained in the shadow of the violence that had triggered them. Over time, as media attention diminished and legal processes concluded, the case entered a different phase, historical memory. In this phase, the emphasis shifted from immediate shock to long-term interpretation. Writers, documentarians, and researchers revisited the case not to report breaking news, but to understand what it represented in the broader context of Italian social history. Some focused on its role in exposing hidden aristocratic lifestyles. Others examined it through the lens of gendered violence. Others still treated it as an example of how private documentation can reshape public understanding of a crime. Yet despite these varied interpretations, the factual core remains unchanged and remarkably simple. 3 people were present in an apartment in Rome on the morning of August 30th, 1970. All 3 died there. One man returned from a journey, entered the apartment, used a shotgun, and then took his own life. Everything else, wealth, journals, media controversy, legal disputes, cultural analysis, exists as context surrounding that moment, not as a replacement for it. This distinction is essential in understanding why the Casati Stampa case continues to be studied. It is not only because of what was revealed about private life, but because it demonstrates how quickly a single event can generate layers of meaning that extend far beyond the original act. It shows how crime becomes history, how private documentation becomes public record, and how personal tragedy becomes cultural reference. In the end, the lasting significance of the case lies not in its sensational elements, but in its reminder of fragility. Fragility of relationships, fragility of control, fragility of reputation, and ultimately, the fragility of life itself, when confronted with irreversible decisions made in moments of emotional collapse. Decades later, the journals remain archived, the properties have changed hands, and the headlines have long since faded. But the central reality of the case has not changed. It remains anchored to a single morning in Rome when private lives, hidden documents, and personal conflict converged into a moment of irreversible violence, one that continues to echo through Italian historical memory, not because of its scandal, but because of its human cost.